I watch people line up 300 people deep early in the morning, and they will have a constant line going for like 2 or 3 hours, where I look at our booth and I'm like, oh, we have 8 or 12 guys here. All these other markets had a COVID boom and then maybe a slight drop, but then they've just gone past where they were during COVID, where comics has definitely come down and seemingly has not rebounded yet. Will there be a spark, or will it just be kind of like a slow surge of momentum?
Let's be honest, the collectible world has gone absolutely mad as of late. Blind bags are flying off tables. Magic the Gathering has collectors spending money like it's 2021 again. Pokemon packs are literally sparking fights in stores, and even modern comic retailers are rebounding. Amidst all the hype, one question remains: what about vintage? How are classic keys holding up? Well, today we're going to find out by going straight to the source. Joining me is Austin Reece, one half of the powerhouse team behind REECE'S Rare Comics, a national dealer who's coming off back-to-back weekends at both New York and Baltimore Comic-Con. Today he's going to give us his unfiltered thoughts. Austin, thanks so much for joining me here today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. You're one of the hosts that starts talking fast as soon as the show starts, so that's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. People don't have time to wait around. They want to know the answers. They need to know right away, how are vintage comics doing? And that's why I am glad that you were able to take the time and talk to me today, because like I already said in the intro, you were both at New York Comic Con in Baltimore, and I'd love to just kind of get your general thoughts of how both of those shows went. We didn't get a chance to see each other at New York because I had to work all weekend at the Walmart booth, which I want to ask you about that collaboration later. But generally speaking, what's going on in terms of vintage these days?
Yeah, look, it's no secret that we had a huge boom during COVID, anywhere from that like 2020 to 2022 marker. We saw books start to sell for 10x of what they were going for in the previous few years. And it really got kind of out of control very quickly. We heard rumors of private investment money coming in and people looking at this as an alternative asset class. And since then, really, I think maybe the end of 2022 or the beginning of 23, we started to see sales decline across the board for most vintage books. And really, you're well aware of this. I don't think that's really let up yet. And in fact, I don't know when your next market report will come out. I like watching those videos of you kind of making the asset class for different eras of comics. But I think this fall will show that these are going to be some of the lowest points that books have sold at in the last 5 or 6 years. So it's definitely an interesting time for vintage books.
It's interesting, and I want to actually show you the recent Go Collect kind of market report. They do their own version of the index right here, and I thought that this was really interesting because you can kind of sort this by past 6 months, past 3 months, past year. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same no matter which one I go to. But let me just kind of quickly show you just a snapshot. So if you go to Golden Age, what they say is it's basically been flat. Silver Age is down 1,600. I don't really want to unpack what the numbers mean, but 16.
Okay.
But the bigger the number, the bigger. Bronze Age is down 1055, so less than Silver Age, and then Copper Age is down 808 over the course of the year, so less than Bronze Age and less than Silver Age, and then Modern, funny enough, is actually up over the course of the year. And let me kind of talk a little bit more about that. One thing I noticed at New York Comic Con is in the vintage area, it was a lot of mixture of like, you guys were there, and then it would be like a modern retailer like right next to you, and then it was like another vintage one, and it just kind of felt like there was more of a mixture. But what do you kind of make of that in general, as far as like some of the vintage stuff kind of still going down, and then surprisingly modern actually doing seemingly pretty well?
Yeah, it's an interesting, I don't know if you want to call it a problem, but it's an interesting thing going on in the market right now, where there's a lot more interest in the modern books. I definitely see a younger crowd going for those kind of books, going for variant books. We set up across from the Comic Mint at New York Comic Con, and they do a great job of producing these variant covers that I guess are limited to the show. And I have a lot of respect for Steve, their owner, because he's really built a great business doing it. And I watch people line up like 300 people deep early in the morning, and they will have a constant line going for like 2 or 3 hours, where I look at our booth and I'm like, oh, we have 8 or 12 guys here. And it just kind of, speaks to me as like different strokes for different folks, right? Like I think the modern world has done a much better job of engaging with its audience. And I think a lot more people, I think it's an easier entry point too, where like you can buy a modern book for $40 or $50 and maybe grade it, get a 9.8, and after the show, wow, that's a $125 book. Vintage, you do need a little bit more income or kind of a higher level barrier to entry. And so I think, we should be doing a better job of maybe trying to reach out to people and getting them excited about vintage books. Because all the people that I sell to are like extremely knowledgeable. It feels like no one is like breaking into vintage books. It's like they've been around vintage books for a long time. And that's not to say that all my customers are 50 and 60-year-old guys. I do have younger guys who are interested in that kind of stuff, but it's a much smaller percentage, I think, of the overall comic collecting community for sure.
I think you're definitely right. The one thing that modern has, kind of like what you were alluding to, was it's a cheaper price entry point for a lot of people to start collecting, and then they can kind of buy, modern book and take it over to the other side of the building in Artist Alley and get it signed and kind of
Yeah.
have a little bit of an experience. And
Yeah.
I think when people go over to the vintage area, it can feel rather intimidating. And, if I go to your booth, like, I take for granted that it's like my eyes go straight to the walls. I know what you got, blah, 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 all this stuff. But like, if you're a new person, a lot of times you don't even know where to begin. Do you kind of notice sometimes people like going over from the booth that you said was you were across from and looking over at your booth and like having needing to hold their hand a little bit?
Absolutely. And the other side of that is, these variant covers, a lot of them are super cool. Like I have a respect for the arts, and these people are doing an incredible job making, really cool looking books. And sometimes on vintage books, look, I have a ton of respect for vintage books, and there's a ton of super cool stuff out there. But if you just like come over and pull out like a random Jimmy Olsen, there's usually something kind of goofy happening on there. So sometimes they'll come over and they'll be like, what? Like, why is Superman doing this? Or like, why is Jimmy Olsen doing this? Or they're like, I can't believe it. Like, these are 60 years old. It's like almost like a different world than what they're exposed to, even though they're at Comic-Con and maybe even buying modern books. So it definitely is like, there's kind of two different areas that, people really like to, are well versed in. And for some people, we are definitely like wow, look at what they have. And for other people, they come just to buy vintage books, and they're the complete opposite. They go, I couldn't care about any of the variant stuff. I'm just here for you guys and a couple other dealers who sell what you have, and then I'm going to get out of here. So it really is, quite a mixed bag, especially at these really big shows like New York Comic Con, where you can have 180,000 people come through the door in a weekend.
Well, let's kind of double click on the New York Comic Con thing. Like, I guess before I jump forward to Baltimore, which I have a feeling is a different audience, how was New York in terms of like the buyers that you found there? I mean, you guys are national, so I assume a lot of times you have a certain customer base that is, buys from you that is just showing up to New York. But was there a sense of a type of crowd or a type of interest or trends that were at that show?
Yeah, it's hard for me as one dealer to kind of pick out any kind of trend, that I could apply universally to the comic market at large, or even to that show. We have been doing New York as a company for 17 years now, so we've really been lucky in being able to build up, these long-term relationships with a lot of people from the area, from the East Coast, and then over the years, people who start to fly in and drive in for that show. But New York for us is always about, I would say quality over quantity. People are looking, as they are at a lot of shows, but more specifically in New York, for high-end Silver Age books, whether that be, an Amazing Fantasy 15, X-Men 1, Daredevil 1, Spider-Man 1. Those are the kind of things that we get asked for very frequently at these shows. Where, as we were going to talk about in Baltimore, it might be a little more niche than that, than what people are looking for in New York.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like at New York there was a particular sense in terms of like Marvel versus DC in any way? Are people kind of like is still on the movie hype train, whether it relates to Marvel or to DC?
Yeah, I really don't get that sense anymore. At least for the last 3 or 4 years, it kind of felt like the movie hype kind of has definitely died down. And I will say this, even during like the peak of it, like that was probably only like 2 to 3% of the conversations we would be having with customers. You would get the occasional guy who would, oh, well, Kang's going to be in, the Avengers, so I got to get the Avengers 8, or Shang-Chi's coming out. And look, it certainly influenced the books and the market. I'm just saying, for us personally, it wasn't as big of a deal as most people would probably guess. And so, on the other side of that, we definitely don't have as much of that now, but it hasn't really impacted, what books people are after. In fact, like, I'm still selling those same books at a different price point now. So the Special Marvel Edition 15s and the Iron Man 55s of the world, like, those are still great books to have. And that's kind of, what made the movies exciting in the first place, is that they were drawing on great source material. So it's like, just because the movies, maybe have come and gone a little bit in the zeitgeist, we still have these incredible pieces of art and history that, are still valuable in their own right.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about New York later on in the show, but let's jump forward to the next weekend where you guys hopped over to Baltimore. Everyone has always told me that you got to go to Baltimore. It's like one of the best shows. It's like the best place to buy comic books. New York, you go for the spectacle, and you go for like the environment, but Baltimore is where all the comics and art is. Tell me about that show, maybe in terms of its difference to New York, and how was this year compared to others?
Sure. Yeah. So Baltimore is like, it's like your dealer's favorite convention, right? It's like,
Mm.
it's a lot less of the spectacle that a New York or a San Diego would be, which means, we don't have these huge displays from Marvel and DC, and we don't have, the Lego booth or Netflix, but it really is, what comic conventions were envisioned as 50 years ago, which was, hey, let's get a bunch of guys who have some really great inventory and put them all together. And whether that's, vintage books, modern books, original art, all of those kind of things can kind of coexist together. But we have, just an incredible display of inventory and books that you won't see anywhere else in the world, except for maybe one or two shows throughout the country during the year. And so that's what makes Baltimore really special, is, it's a long-standing, independently owned convention that's been going on for a very long time. And I think, a lot of people who are into vintage books have a respect for that. And it's just a really great way to engage with our community. As we kind of alluded to earlier, vintage books is a little bit of a smaller community, but that means you get to meet so many great people. And Baltimore's just a celebration of that, I think, when everybody gets to come together and really kind of nerd out on, what we really enjoy without having to deal with, 100,000 people in the aisles.
Yeah, yeah. What was it about this show, as far as like what maybe customers were getting there? Was there a breakdown of raw versus graded stuff? Actually, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, as far as like the trends of what people are looking to buy. I mean, at Baltimore, they had CGC doing on-site grading. I didn't really hear much about, like, if it was a popular feature. I mean, of course, CGC always has a long line at cons, but did you take advantage of that? Or did your customers? What do you kind of feel about this breakdown right now with grading and raw?
Yeah. So again, as a singular opinion, it's hard for me to say if there's an overarching trend. We carry both products at any of our shows. So, and typically we'll have, I would say, anywhere between 600 and 700 graded books available for sale at these shows. And then we would have probably, 10 to 15,000 ungraded books available at the show. So it's hard for me to say if there's any kind of split. It's more about personal preference for that collector. And I try and carry, a little bit of something for everybody. And I know other dealers, feel the same way. Regarding on-site grading, I think that's a great thing that CGC does and has done for a number of years at Baltimore, I think minus one or two. And it's a great addition to the show for people who obviously want to get their books dropped off and then back in their hands the same weekend. Not only can they bring them back and add to their own collections, but there's the other side of it, or maybe they're looking to sell a book, or help fund their trip, whatever it may be, and they can come to us or a number of other dealers and offer us some inventory that we can purchase right then and there, and then come back this week. And now I'm listing a lot of that kind of stuff on our website. So it does add to the show in a different respect, where it's not just about what you sell at the show, it's also about what you're bringing home, which I think is an important aspect to Baltimore and the other shows that CGC does on-site grading at.
Right, right. What about the customers themselves? What's the persona of the buyers that I guess from your one perspective that you see? Like, is it just people that want to fill their runs? Are they still looking for keys? Are they looking for deals more than, you know, um, stuff that they want to collect? Like, what's kind of your sense, if any?
Yeah, so I would say more so at Baltimore than other shows, you do have people who are looking for a deal or looking to complete their run versus just going for the one Hulk 181 in 9.6 or 9.4 or an AF-15. You have people who are kind of, I would say their collection runs a little bit deeper than, hey, here's the top 15 keys of the Silver Age. They're kind of looking for a bit tougher to find Golden Age or even Silver Age in that regard. Maybe they're filling out a pre-hero run from the Silver Age, or they're looking for high grade Archie comics like stuff like that, Nellie the Nurse, and they're really trying to Patsy Walker. Like there's just kind of a different era of titles that they might be looking for that you typically don't hear about in a New York or a San Diego. There's definitely room for other genres outside of the superhero genre to shine, maybe a little more sci-fi stuff like that. And so it really is, it's a collector's show. And I think that's what, makes it special and unique, and why we sell such a different variety of item there.
I think that that's the profile of like the person who maybe has a little bit of nostalgia for that stuff, or like kind of likes the more kitschy golden age or obscure things, or is it more like, hey, these are a part of the hunt. Like I just want to find more oddball, quirky things because that's sort of for even for myself, the dopamine that I get with like finding like the obscure book that you don't typically see.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it's more about the thrill of the hunt, and that, a lot of these guys, when I'm talking about, our typical Baltimore patron, have been around the hobby, the industry for such a long time that it's weirdly like a Spider-Man 129 doesn't get them excited anymore, because they've known that they could have had the opportunity to buy one at any show that they've been to for the last 30 years. And so what's more exciting is seeing a Patsy Walker #1 or a Startling Comics 49, which is something that you could go to shows for years sometimes and not find a copy, or if you do, you won't find one in the condition that you're looking for in the budget that you have. And so that's what's exciting about those shows. And honestly, that's what still gets exciting as dealers, is seeing books that we never really get to see, and just figuring out what's still out there.
Yeah, I would definitely say that one of the big hiccups I'd say for vintage is, just being able to kind of generate excitement around the new oddball thing. Like even if it's like, hey, yeah, Patsy Walker is like the cool comic all of a sudden, that could generate just a lot of like interest and people getting into that. And I don't know how that it makes its way through the vintage thing, because I saw an interesting comment on my video that said, one of the issues that vintage has is that it's hard to generate like where people are looking next. And even if it's people don't like that because it's talking about FOMO, but like sometimes you need a little bit of like the lifeblood to like kick into gear to be like, hey, there's a new comic here, let's take a look at this, and then you kind of venture off into what you want, or what you typically want, versus in modern comic books, because there's a clear new thing like a blind bag, for instance, like that kind of keeps the machine moving. So interesting to see if there can ever be a solution for that, or some kind of way for people who are into vintage to kind of generate that excitement for those old books.
Yeah,
But
I just think it's an interesting point. I agree with you. It's something that I don't even know if I necessarily would want. It's to me, it's about collecting what you like and figuring, kind of your own lane. And still, seemingly, we do have trends in vintage collecting. I remember several years ago, it felt like a lot of people were really going after pre-code horror books, which had largely been ignored for 10 or 15 years, as far as when CGC was grading them. And you could find really cheap, super cool books for like 100 or 150 bucks, and some of them skyrocketed to 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 bucks. And some of those books are holding up quite nicely compared to the rest of the vintage market. And then more recently, I think the DC Silver Age horror stuff and Bronze Age horror stuff, House of Mystery and House of Secrets, high grade Bernie Wrights and stuff, those are like consistently setting records at auction. And so maybe there is some hype, FOMO, whatever you want to call it. Like there's a new push in that direction where, again, largely been ignored for 20 years. I'm sure there were guys out there doing it, but, it takes multiple guys for a book to break, new auction records, especially when the rest of the market is down. So, interesting point, but I do think there are still some kind of niches that people are leaning into.
Oh yeah, you stepped on my soon to come up question, which was I was going to ask you. Being that we're close to Halloween, were you feeling any sense of PCH or Bronze Age horror or that type of stuff getting exciting at this time of year? Because I feel like this is the time that people start to share all the stuff on social media, and I've been seeing it myself. But relating that to even something we were talking about earlier, it does kind of feel like there is more of a draw towards like less about the movie spec or the hype or whatever, and more about like, oh, this is a Bernie Wrightson cover, and he's an artist legend, and that seems to be what has withstood the correction, so to speak. It's just these comics that are celebrated for just that, the comic book itself and the quality of the art or the story.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, for a market to exist, you have to have the demand part of the supply and demand. And, what we've seen over the last couple of years is that, the demand has dropped. I think the supply has slightly gone up in certain cases, but overall, the demand has diminished. And whether that was people jumping in during COVID, because I heard it a million times, they're, oh wow, I did this 20 years ago or 30 years ago with my dad, and now I don't really have anything to do, and I wanted to get back into it. And so we just had a lot of that kind of a surge of interest all at once. And I think you said earlier, it's interesting because all these other markets had a COVID boom and then maybe a slight drop, but then they've just gone, and completely gone past where they were during COVID, where comics has definitely come down and seemingly has not rebounded yet. And so it'll be interesting to see when and if that does happen, kind of, will there be a spark, or will it just be kind of like a slow surge of momentum? And that's something I'm not too sure about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I do think that there's the possibility that things can turn around, especially if there's new avenues to buy stuff. Which I kind of want to push you to this side of the conversation, which is the explosion of online buying when it comes to vintage comic books. I mean, you go around the nation to all the big shows, you guys set up, and you certainly, it's great that we have the Comic Cons and people can buy there. But, I'm sure you guys also take advantage of online selling platforms. You have your own website where you sign directly out of that. Yeah, I know that you guys consign or use the Shortbox platform. At New York Comic Con, they had like a conversation of, that they're going to do a collaboration with Walmart to be able to kind of like put some of those listings onto their platform. I guess, most broadly, like, what do you think about the online marketplace, and how have you seen it sort of change what you guys do? And is it, being that you have your own site, maybe it would be better if you have people buy directly from you, but like, do you enjoy being able to kind of list your inventory on all these various platforms?
Yeah, look, I think exposure to not just vintage comic books, but to our personal inventory as a business owner, I mean, that's only a good thing for us. If we can get more eyeballs on our products, whether that be on Shortboxed or now that they're collaborating with Walmart, whether it's on Walmart.com, whether it's on ReeceComics.com, whether it's on eBay, like those are all good things, not just for us, but for the vintage market at large. And look, we were talking about, how prices have come down and the market's slow and blah, blah, blah. If you look at how busy we are during like your typical week and, the orders that we're doing and the amount of books that we sell, you would have no idea that, the market has been in a little bit of a decline in the last few years. We're still plenty busy selling a lot of product across multiple different platforms. Like you mentioned, we do sell on eBay, on Shortbox, via our own website. And so we're plenty busy. And I think it's a good thing that we can get our product in front of more eyeballs, and hopefully, when you have this push from, some of these larger companies, quite frankly, they're able to achieve, potentially advertising in ways that Reese's Rare Comics never could. And so I hope that they do that. I hope they continue to do it and get more people involved, because I think it's only a good thing for all of us.
Can I ask something about that? Because never, not that you could ever put the genie back in the bottle with like all the explosion of like online spaces and the whole ecosystem around selling. But I've heard people say things like it's actually hurt values of comic books now that there's just like so much availability there. Or like, people don't go to the cons anymore because why would I go pay a ticket to go to the con and pay for parking and do the whole thing if I can just buy it online? Like, do you think that it's hurt in that sense, or do they have a point there, or do you think that a broader exposure is just better in general, even if that kind of fluctuates some values over the short term?
Yeah, I don't think it affects the values as much, because if that were the case, I think we'd see that across all the other hobbies. I think we'd see that with sports cards. I think we'd see that with Pokemon. And, I don't know how aware you are of those two markets right now, but those are going crazy. And that's new product, it's vintage product. Every other video in my TikTok algorithm is about, Pokemon and sports cards collectors setting up at local conventions and selling there. And so I think it's more about if we can remove the friction from people buying in person versus online, then they're just going to do what they prefer. And if your goal is just to acquire the item for the cheapest cost, with the shortest amount of wait time, then online is, it's unrivaled. There's another side to conventions where I think it's not just about acquiring the book or buying the thing. It's about engaging with the community. It's about meeting people. Me and you got to meet several years ago, and I don't know if we would be doing this today if we hadn't then. And so I think that's, I don't want to say it's a lost part of it, but like that's part of why we all started doing these conventions in the first place, was like, hey, let's get all these people who are of a like-minded, and really you're talking about really niche, like we're talking about like comic book collectors were shunned. Like this is before I was involved. Like I'm talking my dad and all those people, they were nerds. Like they weren't accepted where they were. And so it was like this was the place where you can come and congregate and talk about all this stuff that nobody else in your school knows, nobody at your work knows. And I think that's still an important piece of conventions, and coming together as a community and really embracing that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, it's a lot of ways, the LCS was always that place, and as LCSs have become more niche already than they are, it makes the importance of going to cons even much, even that much more. On top of that, I think social media has become a place for people to kind of gather and hang out. And I kind of want to ask you a little bit about that, because you mentioned the getting these sports cards and Pokemon reels being sent on your Instagram. I get that stuff all the time, and I think it's so interesting because like I get it. I get why it's so shareable and viral because, especially with trading cards because of the pack rips and getting the pull and all this. And right now we have kind of a craze going on in comics with blind bags. And we hinted a little bit at it at the beginning with the modern stuff. Most recently and notably, Mark Spears had like a Monsters blind bag. I don't know if you heard about that product, but I'm curious just what your thought is on that. Or do you have like customers chatting about it, or do you even have people asking you if you guys are carrying blind bags? I'd be curious to hear what you think.
You're probably going to be disappointed by this answer, but it's like a whole different world than what we
Yeah.
deal in. I don't know really about them. I've seen some of the, I think, Halloween-ish ones floating around on social media. But yeah, my customers are largely uninvolved in that kind of stuff. And quite frankly, I don't really deal in that world very much either. I kind of like my playground of playing with old funny books. And so that's kind of where we like to stay. But no, it is an interesting thing. I do, to go back to the Pokemon and sports cards, social media craze. I think they have an interesting strategy of, a lot of them are like live streaming their convention setups. And I thought, what an interesting concept that, someone online is going to like, they're feeling like they're a part of the show and a part of that community, that dealers community, by watching that. And then they can, then break it down and post it onto, whatever, social media platforms they're on. But it definitely speaks to a younger and I think honestly a more creative way to go about doing business. And that I think maybe vintage comic books, if you look around at the dealers, you would notice that Alex and I are probably some of the youngest, if not the youngest ones out there. And so I think there is space for other young guys to come in and not even disrupt, but maybe add to what we already do. And so that would be interesting to see if somebody took a page from that book and brought it over to our industry.
Maybe you guys should be the ones to do it. I'm just saying, next con, Austin and Alex just live streaming from all the shows. I think it would be actually a pretty good idea.
I'd really have to start watching what I say, wouldn't I?
I mean, hey, like that's even better. That's part of the appeal. People just want to get the real insights.
We're boring, I promise.
Very fair. Well, you're not boring to me, Austin. I appreciate you, coming on the show and kind of giving us your thoughts on New York and Baltimore and everything kind of going on. It's really, super valuable to be able to kind of hear from, boots on the ground, what you guys are seeing, what's kind of moving out there in the market. Before I totally let you go, I did want to ask you about one more kind of modern invention within the kind of collectible world, and that is the explosion of Courtyard.io. Now, I don't know if you know about this company. They had a massive booth over at New York. It was on the other side of where you guys were set up. Okay, yeah, so you saw them, and so it, and it's interesting because it's definitely much bigger within the card world. But recently, they started to do vintage comic books, and they're printing money over there. They're definitely doing kind of the repacks. Effectively, they call it a slot machine or a vending machine, excuse me. But it's maybe that was
Freudian
a little
slip there, huh?
Freudian slip right there. Yeah, they call it the vending machine, but it's kind of like a rebranded mystery box in a way. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, the success of it. I know a lot of people that used it right when it came out, and have you had any interaction with them? Because I know that the rumor and the conversation has been like, hey, they got to go over to the vintage side. They got to buy up some inventory. They got to like be able to package it within their product. But what do you kind of make of that whole world?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think as I was just saying, like us taking a page from that world and bringing it over, I think they're kind of doing the opposite, which is sports cards have been doing box breaks, they've been doing these repacks, they've been doing this for years, and so I think it's interesting that there's a company who's kind of first they made it all digital, right? So it's not just like a physical product, reveal live stream. It's, hey, you can go online anytime and click this button and do it. And the other side is to break it into all different hobbies, which is, sports cards, Pokemon, comic books. So look, it's interesting. I guess I've been around long enough that I'm worried, not worried, but I'm interested to see if it lasts. There's been a lot of things that have kind of come and gone, during my time where it looked like, hey, that's the next big thing. And then, after a couple of years, it started to fade away. There's always kind of an excitement or with a newness or a new product or idea like that. And so whether it sticks around is going to be the interesting part to me. And then, as it relates to vintage comics, I mean, it'll be interesting because, as I mentioned in the very beginning, I think the barrier to entry to get like a $500 comic is so high for most people. Like, I'm kind of thinking in terms of like a teenager, a 10 or a 11 or 12 or 15-year-old kid, whatever. But if you buy like a pack of cards at your card shop for $10, like there is the chance that you get the $300 chase card and you can submit it to PSA, and like then you could like trade that and get like $350 in cards and like really like bootstrap your way into like having like a pretty cool little card collection or even like a small business as like a young adult. And I think that's the hard part about comics is like, you really just have to like save up and then buy the comic, and that's kind of it. And so if there's an opportunity there where, hopefully they don't spend all their money on this, but if they responsibly spend their money and like hit a big thing, like it could really kind of accelerate their collection or their, whatever they want to do with it, part of their small business or whatever. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And, similar to Walmart and all these other bigger companies coming in, it seems like they're pretty serious about breaking into this world. And so, I think it'll be interesting to see what they do and how they do it, and I hope it's a net positive for the comic world.
Yeah, I think very well said. I mean, part of it is there's a lot of excitement right now with it, but let's take a look, 5 years from now and see, if these companies are still here, if they've expanded the hobby in any kind of way. But that will be the true test. But until then, Austin, want to say thank you so much for hopping on the channel and kind of breaking everything down for us today. We'll have to do this again at some point in the future. But until you're on the show next time, maybe you can let the people know where they can find you and keep up with everything going on with REECE'S Rare Comics.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. First and foremost, every day we're not at conventions. We list new products for sale on our website. It's just reececomics.com. You can always find us on eBay, but our website is going to be a little bit cheaper. We're on Instagram at REECE'S Rare Comics. And then we're always attending shows throughout the country. So though it is near the end of our show schedule this year, we travel all over the country attending conventions. And if you ever see us, please come by, say hi. Talk about comics, talk about whatever, but we always like meeting new people out on the road. So hopefully we'll see some of you guys out there.
All right, very cool. Well, thanks so much, Austin. Catch you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.